It was 7:15 a.m. I walked out the front door with a hot mug of coffee, intending to get into my car and go to work. But when I opened the door, I almost dropped my mug. I couldn't believe my eyes. I rubbed them a few times. No, I wasn't seeing things. My driveway was completely empty. My beloved Ford F-150 truck was gone. I had parked the car in the driveway myself last night. I was sure I locked it. Was the car stolen? My heart started pounding. This neighborhood is supposed to be the safest area in the city. That's why I bought a house here. And my car gets stolen from here? I took my phone out of my pocket to call the police, but just then I saw a bright neon sticker on the mailbox. I went closer. On the sticker, written in big letters, was towed. And right below that, by order of the HOA board. My blood boiled. My own house, my own driveway, and someone had the nerve to take my car away? And that too without calling me or giving me any notice? Friends, imagine for a second. You wake up in the morning, find your car missing from your garage, and find out your neighbor had it towed away. How would you feel? Would you stay quiet, or would you see this through to the end? Today's story is the story of the biggest battle of my life. A battle that started over a simple parking spot, but ended with the downfall of the entire HOA board. My name is Mike, and you are listening to my revenge story. If this story makes your blood boil, like the video now and write revenge in the comments. And yes, don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin. The incident started about a year ago. My wife Lisa and I had been looking for a house in a quiet area, away from the city noise, for a long time. Our budget wasn't huge, but we wanted a place where we could be safe. After a lot of searching, a real estate agent showed us this project called Oakwood Estates. We fell in love with the place at first sight. Rows of oak trees on both sides of the road, every lawn perfectly trimmed, no trash on the streets. It looked like a movie set. The agent told us, "Look, Mike, the rules in this area are a bit strict because there is a very active HOA here. They try very hard to maintain the standard of the area." I thought back then, this is good. If there are rules, the area will stay nice and there won't be people loitering. But I didn't know that this active HOA actually meant dictatorship. The buying process finished. We moved in. The first month was like a dream. Neighbors came and welcomed us, but the trouble started in the second month when I met Mr. Richards. Mr. Richards, our HOA president. He's in his 60s, a retired government employee. He has endless time, and he spends this endless time on only one task: finding other people's mistakes. I first met him on a Saturday afternoon. I was watering my lawn. Suddenly, I saw a man with a measuring tape measuring the height of my mailbox. Surprised, I asked, "Hello, can I help you?" Without looking at me, he said, "Your mailbox is 41 inches off the ground. According to the rules, it must be 40 inches, 1 inch too high. Fix this or a fine notice will be sent." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed and said, "Will 1 inch really cause a problem?" He looked at me through his glasses as if I had committed a terrible crime. "Rules are rules, Mr. Mike. We are not here to build a jungle." I should have understood that day that I would have trouble with this man in the future. But I quietly lowered the mailbox. I thought, let's just solve the issue. But I didn't know this was just the beginning. I am a construction supervisor by profession. For my work, I have to drive a large pickup truck, a black Ford F-150. I love this car. After work, I always try to park the car in my garage. But because my garage is a bit small and has some storage boxes inside, the truck wouldn't fit all the way in. So I used to park the car in my driveway in front of the house. I was given a copy of the Oakwood Estates rules. It said, no cars can be parked on the street overnight. A very simple rule. I never parked on the street. I always kept my car in my own driveway. My tires never touched the sidewalk or the road. But Mr. Richards had eyes like a vulture. The night before that cursed morning, I returned from work a little late. It was 11 p.m. It was raining heavily. I hurriedly parked the car in the driveway. Because of the rain, maybe I didn't notice that my car's rear bumper was hanging over the sidewalk just a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 inches. But my tires? The tires were completely inside my property. I went inside, freshened up, and went to sleep. Who knew that on that stormy night, Mr. Richards was patrolling the neighborhood in a raincoat with a flashlight? Let's go back to that morning. I was shaking with the towed sticker in my hand. There was a phone number on it, City Towing. I dialed it immediately. A man with a rough voice answered from the other end. City Towing, how can I help you? My car was taken from here, from Oakwood Estates. My name is Mike. 1 minute. Yes, black Ford truck. That's in our yard. The HOA President called it in. Towed for obstructing sidewalk. I screamed, obstructing the sidewalk? Are you crazy? My car was in my driveway. The man replied carelessly, Sir, we have photos, and we won't release the car without a release order. You come, pay the $300 fee, and take the car. And yes, for every hour you were late, the storage charge increases by $50. $300? On top of that, now I have to take an Uber to the other side of the city to get the car. My temper was through the roof. I decided I would get the car later. First, I needed to deal with Mr. Richards. I walked fast towards Richards' house. His house is 3 doors down from mine. When I knocked on his door, it was about 7:30 a.m. Richards himself opened the door. He had a bright white coffee cup in his hand, wearing an iron shirt. That familiar, mocking smile was on his face. Good morning, Mike. Need something? I was shaking with anger. Richards, why did you tow my car? You know it was in my driveway. Richards sipped his coffee very calmly. Then he said, Mike, didn't you read our rule book carefully? Section 9, paragraph 3 clearly states, if any part of a vehicle hangs over the public sidewalk, it will be considered dangerous for pedestrians and will be removed immediately. I said, you could have knocked on my door. You could have told me to move the car back a little. You took it away like a car thief at 2 a.m.? Richards smiled. That smile was toxic. We are not here to babysit anyone, Mike. The law is equal for everyone. Besides, that huge truck of yours doesn't match the beauty of this neighborhood. It looks like a commercial vehicle. Be careful in the future, or maybe next time the fine will be higher. He closed the door in my face. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists from insult, anger, and helplessness. He didn't just tow my car, he insulted me. He wanted to show that he is the king of this neighborhood and we are his subjects. But Mr. Richards made a mistake. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know that I work in construction where I have to read 1,000 complex rules and contracts. He showed me the rule book? Fine. I told myself, Richards, you wanted a war? You will get a war. But this war will be played using that precious rule book of yours. I didn't know then what I was actually going to do, but I knew this. I would get revenge for this $300 and the towing. I would get it back with interest.
By 7:02 a.m., the deputies had stepped back toward their cruiser, and the HOA president stood alone near the driveway, acting like the mountain already belonged to her. I went back to what I had been doing before she arrived. I picked up a thermos from the tailgate of my truck, poured coffee into a metal cup, and walked toward the porch without acknowledging her commentary. The house was quiet, unfinished, but solid, and the morning routine mattered more to me than her performance. I set the cup down on a sawhorse, checked a stack of lumber I planned to reuse, and reviewed measurements I had written the night before. Normal work, normal pace. That seemed to irritate her more than arguing ever would. She followed me a few steps closer and told me to stop touching association-controlled property. She said every movement was being documented. She said continuing work would increase penalties. I didn't respond. I pulled on gloves and lifted a loose board from the porch rail, inspecting the rot I already knew was there. She snapped that I was deliberately violating orders. She said she would add it to the report. She held up her clipboard and began writing aggressively, like volume might substitute for authority. She finally stepped directly into my path and told me I needed to acknowledge the notice. She waved a printed form inches from my chest. The paper listed violations in bold letters, citing appearance standards, safety concerns, and unauthorized activity. It claimed the property had been unmaintained for over a year. It claimed neighbors had complained. It claimed the association had attempted contact multiple times. I glanced at it once. The date was wrong. The parcel number was partially incorrect. The signature line bore her name alone. She told me the initial fine was $500 for non-compliance. She said it would double every 7 days until resolved. She said refusal to pay would result in a lien. She said liens led to foreclosure. She said foreclosure happened quietly up here. She smiled while explaining it.
like she enjoyed simplifying the process for me. She told me to sign the acknowledgement. I didn't take the pen. She switched tactics and lowered her voice, speaking slowly like I was a problem she had solved before. She said mountain communities didn't tolerate outsiders who thought they could buy and rebuild without permission. She said this wasn't the city. She said the HOA protected property values. She said my half-renovated house was an eyesore. She gestured broadly at the forest, as if the trees agreed with her. She said neighbors were watching. She said people wanted action. I walked past her and opened the truck bed again, pulling out a toolbox. She stepped aside reluctantly, offended that I hadn't engaged. She told me to stop ignoring her. She told the deputies I was refusing to comply with a lawful order. One of them reminded her that HOA notices weren't law enforcement orders. She shot him a look and said the association worked closely with the county. She said cooperation was expected. She then pointed at my truck and said it was parked in violation of community guidelines. She said commercial vehicles weren't allowed overnight. I told her it wasn't commercial. She said ladders made it commercial. She said tools made it commercial. She said intent mattered more than classification. She wrote another note and told me that was an additional $200 fine. She said fines accrued independently. She said I should be keeping track. She accused me of storing materials improperly. She accused me of failing to submit architectural plans. She accused me of altering exterior elements without approval. Every accusation was delivered calmly, confidently, like she had rehearsed them in sequence. She told me to remove the lumber immediately. She told me to cease all activity. She told me the association would bring its own crew if I didn't comply, and I would be billed for it. I asked her where the association boundary markers were. She said she didn't need to show them. She said maps were on file. She said my questioning was further evidence of bad faith. She said she was done explaining. She said this was my final warning for the morning. She said future communication would be in writing only. She slid another paper from the clipboard and taped it to the front door without asking. The notice was bright orange, deliberately visible against the dark wood. It listed non-compliant structure in large print. It warned of enforcement action. It cited safety risk. It threatened additional penalties. She stepped back and admired it, satisfied. She told the deputies the notice had been served. She told them to record the time. She told me to read it carefully because ignorance wouldn't protect me. I peeled the tape loose and folded the paper without comment. She gasped and said tampering with posted notice was another violation. She said fines would increase. She said I was making things worse for myself. She said this could have been simple if I had just listened. She said stubbornness always cost more in the end. I went back to my measurements and wrote one more number in my notebook. She stood there, arms crossed, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. The deputies exchanged looks but stayed silent. The mountain stayed quiet. The sun finally cleared the ridge, lighting the porch and the notice-free door. She realized then that I wasn't reacting the way she expected. She told me she would return with updated fines by the afternoon. She told me to think carefully about my options. She told me cooperation was still possible if I acted quickly. She walked back toward her car with the confidence of someone who believed pressure alone could win. I took another sip of coffee and continued working, knowing she had just escalated something she didn't understand yet.
By 10:41 a.m., the first escalation arrived, delivered the way intimidation usually is in mountain communities, quiet but deliberate. A certified letter was slid under the windshield wiper of my truck, sealed, stamped, and marked urgent. I didn't open it immediately. I finished tightening a brace under the porch and washed my hands at the outdoor spigot before unfolding the paper. The notice stated that my initial fines had increased from $500 to $1,500 due to continued non-compliance and failure to acknowledge service. It listed a deadline of 48 hours to remit payment or face additional enforcement actions. It cited sections of the HOA bylaws that didn't apply to my parcel. It didn't matter. The language was confident, absolute, and wrong. 30 minutes later, a second letter arrived by email, identical in content but harsher in tone.
It accused me of hostile refusal. It claimed I had interfered with HOA safety inspections. It stated that my vehicle had been logged as improperly parked and subject to towing at association discretion. The message closed with a warning that continued defiance would trigger lien proceedings without further notice. There was no signature, only the HOA letterhead and the president's typed name. At noon, the HOA president returned, this time without deputies, but with a folding chair and a portable printer in the back of her SUV. She parked deliberately close to my truck and stepped out like she planned to stay a while. She told me the fines had increased again due to ongoing violations. She said the total was now $2,200. She said the clock was running. She said deadlines didn't pause just because I ignored them. She began taping notices to every visible surface she could reach. One went on the porch post. One went on the electrical panel. One went on the truck window. Each one carried bold red language about enforcement and safety risk. She told me this was documentation. She told me documentation mattered in court. She told me I was building a record against myself. I asked her to identify the specific bylaw granting the HOA authority over a non-member property. She told me membership was automatic. I asked her to show proof. She said proof would be presented during enforcement proceedings. I asked why the parcel number on the notice didn't match the county record. She said clerical errors didn't invalidate authority. I asked why the association boundary map excluded my lot. She said maps were outdated. I asked why the county tax statement listed me as sole owner without encumbrance. She said tax records weren't controlling. She accused me of stalling. She accused me of playing games. She accused me of pretending ignorance. She said I knew exactly what I was doing. She said people like me always tried to argue technicalities. She said technicalities didn't stop bulldozers. She said if I didn't comply, the association would tow my truck, secure the structure, and assess demolition costs if deemed necessary. She said unsafe structures were removed every year. She said the mountain didn't tolerate blight. She printed another notice and handed it to me directly. This one warned of imminent lien filing. It stated the association would recover costs through foreclosure if necessary. It cited emergency powers. It cited community welfare. It cited safety concerns that hadn't been inspected. I read it carefully and pointed out that no inspection report was attached. She said one wasn't required. I pointed out that demolition required county approval. She said the HOA coordinated with the county. I pointed out that coordination required written authorization. She said I would see it soon enough. She called her attorney while standing 10 feet from me and spoke loudly enough for the mountain to hear. She said the owner was refusing to comply. She said enforcement had escalated. She said she wanted lien paperwork prepared immediately. She said she also wanted authorization to tow and secure. She nodded while listening, satisfied. She ended the call and told me things were moving faster now. By mid-afternoon, a tow company truck appeared at the bottom of the driveway and waited. She pointed at it and told me that was my last chance. She said once the truck was hooked, storage fees would begin. She said unpaid fees compounded quickly. She said I should think rationally. I told her the truck was on private property. She said the HOA had emergency access rights. I told her to show them. She said refusal to move the vehicle was further non-compliance. She handed me a final warning notice with a deadline of 5 p.m. It stated that failure to resolve violations would result in immediate enforcement actions, including lien filing, towing vehicle, and structure condemnation review. She underlined the words immediate and condemnation with a pen hard enough to tear the paper. She told me she was done being patient. I responded calmly. I told her the property was not within the HOA's jurisdiction. I told her the notices were invalid. I told her the fines were unenforceable. I told her any lien would be fraudulent. I told her towing would constitute trespass. I told her demolition threats without inspection were illegal. I told her all of this slowly, clearly, without raising my voice. She listened, then laughed once, short and dismissive. She said I was wrong. She said I had been warned. She said she had documentation. She said the association always won these fights. She said mountains favored authority. She told the tow truck driver to stand by. She turned back to me and said this was no longer a discussion. She said it was enforcement. The sun dropped lower behind the ridge, shadows stretching across the driveway. Notices fluttered slightly in the wind. The tow truck engine idled. The HOA president checked her watch and smiled, convinced the pressure would break me before the deadline did.
The damage started at 6:27 a.m. the next morning, early enough that the frost hadn't burned off the gravel yet. I was inside the house checking water lines when the sound of metal tearing cut through the quiet. It wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. I stepped onto the porch just in time to see an HOA contracted truck reverse hard into the old steel gate at the base of the driveway. The hinges snapped, the posts split. The gate collapsed sideways into the ditch like it had been kicked aside. The HOA president stood nearby with her arms folded, watching it happen without flinching. She said the gate had been illegally installed. She said emergency access required removal. She said the association had authority to clear obstructions. I told her that gate had been there for decades. She said history didn't matter. She said access did. The truck pulled forward, dragging broken metal across the gravel, gouging deep ruts into the driveway as it went. Stones scraped, dust lifted. The damage was immediate and obvious. I walked down toward them and told the driver to stop. He looked past me at the HOA president. She nodded once. He kept going. The truck tires crushed the edge of the drainage channel, collapsing part of the culvert I had just repaired the week before. Water pooled instantly, muddy and fast. She watched it happen and wrote something on her clipboard. She told me this was what non-compliance looked like. She told me I should have moved faster yesterday. She told me repairs were my responsibility. She told me the association wouldn't cover damage caused during enforcement. She said that was clearly stated in the bylaws. She didn't show me where. By mid-morning, they moved closer to the house. An HOA utility contractor arrived and shut off the exterior water valve without warning. I asked why. She said unapproved renovations couldn't have active utilities. She said it was a safety issue. I told her I had exposed pipes that would freeze. She said that wasn't her concern. She said I should have thought about that before violating rules. An hour later, the power went out. No notice, no explanation, just silence and the low hum of the mountain wind. I stepped outside and saw the contractor sealing the meter box with a bright red tag. The HOA president stood beside him, pointing at the house. She said the structure had been flagged unsafe. She said power restoration would require compliance. She said the association was protecting the community. Inside the house, my phone buzzed with missed calls. I was supposed to be on a remote conference call for work that morning, the final sign-off on a project that had been scheduled weeks ago. No power meant no connection. No connection meant delay. Delay meant consequences. I stepped back outside and told her this interference was affecting my job. She shrugged and said personal inconvenience wasn't the association's problem. She walked past me and pointed toward the back of the property, where a small fenced garden sat near the slope. I had kept it intact while renovating, more habit than sentiment. She said the fencing violated appearance standards. She told the contractor to remove it. He cut the wire without hesitation. The fence fell inward, and loose soil slid downhill, taking young plants with it. The irrigation line snapped when the posts came out, spraying water into the dirt until it drained away uselessly. I told her to stop. She told me the garden wasn't approved. She told me it was irrelevant. She told me mountain properties weren't for personal projects without permission. She said the association had standards. She said enforcement wasn't personal. Her tone said otherwise. By mid-morning, the driveway was scarred, the gate destroyed, the water shut off, the power cut, and the garden flattened. I documented everything calmly, taking photos, noting times. She noticed and smirked. She said pictures wouldn't help. She said enforcement actions were protected. She said the association had lawyers who loved documentation.
A neighbor down the slope stopped to watch. The HOA president waved and told him everything was under control. She said the property was being corrected. She said safety came first. When he asked if the house was occupied, she said it didn't matter. She said occupancy didn't override violations. She leaned closer to me then and lowered her voice. She said pressure made people reasonable. She said this would continue until I complied. She said fines would keep increasing. She said damage was an unfortunate consequence of defiance. She said the association always finished what it started. The contractor packed up and left, tire tracks deep in the gravel. The HOA president stayed a moment longer, surveying the damage like an accomplishment. She told me she would return with updated fines. She told me restoration requests would be denied until compliance. She told me I should consider cooperation before things escalated further. When she finally drove away, the mountain went quiet again, but the silence was heavier. The house sat dark. The driveway was broken. Water pooled where it shouldn't. The gate lay twisted in the ditch. The damage was real, measurable, and intentional. I didn't rush to fix anything. I documented the last details, then went back inside and wrote one final note in my log. She thought destruction would force submission. She thought inconvenience would end resistance. She was wrong about that, and she was about to find out.
The preparation started quietly that same afternoon, without tools, without confrontation, without anything the HOA president would recognize as resistance. I cleaned the mud from my boots, sat at the folding table inside the dark house, and laid out paperwork she had never asked to see. Deeds, surveys, easements, permits, inspection reports, all organized and current. I powered a small generator just long enough to scan documents and upload them through a secure connection. No calls, no announcements, just steps taken in order. I walked the property once more before dusk, measuring damage, noting angles, documenting tire depth, recording serial numbers from contractor vehicles she had authorized. I flagged broken culverts, snapped photos of the crushed irrigation line, and logged timestamps with GPS coordinates embedded. The work was methodical, boring to anyone watching, invisible to anyone assuming panic. From the road, it probably looked like I was packing up. Inside, I opened a hard case I hadn't touched in years. It held equipment most renovators didn't carry, and permits most homeowners didn't know existed. I didn't use it yet. I checked it, verified calibration, and locked it again. Preparation wasn't about action, it was about readiness. The HOA president returned just before sunset, confident and relaxed. She stood at the edge of the ruin's driveway and smiled when she saw the gate still down. She said she had expected that. She said most people broke by now. She said the fines had reached $4,000. She said lien paperwork was already drafted. She said she could still stop it if I agreed to terms tonight. She told me the association had voted by email. She told me enforcement had unanimous support. She told me demolition review was scheduled for the morning. She said unsafe structures didn't last long up here. She said the mountain made decisions simple. I asked her for one thing. I asked her to put everything in writing. She laughed and said it already was. She said she had a file thicker than my arm. She said judges loved organized plaintiffs. She said I should worry about losing the house before winter. She said utilities wouldn't be restored. She said towing was still on the table. She walked the property like a victor, pointing out flaws, narrating consequences. She said the driveway damage was my fault. She said the gate removal was necessary. She said the garden never should have existed. She said compliance would allow restoration. She said resistance would erase the structure entirely. I nodded once. That seemed to please her. She mistook acknowledgement for surrender. She told me she would return in the morning with inspectors. She told me to be ready to leave. She told me it would go easier if I cooperated. She got into her car satisfied, already rehearsing how she would explain the outcome to the board. That night, I worked under battery light, quietly, deliberately. I drafted notices of my own, formatted precisely, citing statutes she hadn't read and authorities she hadn't contacted. I prepared filings that didn't require her permission. I scheduled inspections she didn't control. I didn't submit them yet. Timing mattered. I slept for 4 hours and woke before dawn. The mountain was still, cold, and clear. I walked the driveway again, testing stability, confirming measurements. I marked positions with chalk where damage intersected property lines. I photographed the gate hinges one last time. I checked the generator fuel. I checked the case again. At 7:30 a.m., the HOA president arrived with 2 men in reflective vests and a clipboard thicker than before. She introduced them as inspectors. She said the review would be quick. She said she expected a recommendation for condemnation. She said she hoped I had arranged transportation. She didn't notice the small changes, the additional markers, the new signage posted exactly where required, the recording devices mounted discreetly, the documents clipped neatly and visible through the window. She didn't ask why I looked calm. One inspector asked if utilities were active. She answered for me and said no. She said that proved her point. I let her talk. The other inspector asked about permits. She said none had been approved. I stepped forward and handed him a folder. He flipped through it slowly, frowning slightly. She told him those weren't relevant. He kept reading. She interrupted and said time was limited. She said the association had authority to proceed. She said she wanted the recommendation today. She said delays were unacceptable. She said the board was impatient. The inspector asked a question she didn't expect. He asked why the parcel number on her notice didn't match the county file. She said clerical error. He asked why the easement line differed from her map. She said outdated records. He asked why enforcement had begun without a formal inspection report. She said emergency powers. Her confidence wavered just slightly. She recovered quickly and told him she had county backing. She said law enforcement had already been involved. She said everything was documented. She said the owner was uncooperative. I spoke then, briefly. I said the documentation was incomplete. I said inspections should be postponed. I said enforcement actions had caused measurable damage. I said records would reflect that. I didn't say how. I didn't say why. I didn't say who would be reading them. She laughed again, sharper this time. She said I was bluffing. She said people always tried that at the end. She said the mountain didn't care about paperwork. She said authority won. The inspector closed the folder and said he needed to make a call. The HOA president waved dismissively and said fine. She told me this was my last quiet moment. She said once the process started, it wouldn't stop. She said I should have chosen cooperation when I had the chance. I watched her walk away, confident she had already won, unaware that preparation had already shifted the ground beneath her feet.
The mistake happened at 9:14 a.m., loud enough to echo down the valley and public enough that she couldn't undo it later. A county patrol SUV rolled up the driveway again, lights off but presence deliberate, followed by a flatbed truck and 2 HOA board members I hadn't seen before. The HOA president stepped out first, smiling wider than she had all week. She held a stack of papers raised high, already announcing that enforcement authority had been approved. She said the county was cooperating. She said resistance was over. She walked straight up to me and thrust the papers forward, telling the deputies to witness service. She said the documents authorized immediate seizure of the property due to safety violations and unpaid fines. She said the structure was condemned effective immediately. She said removal of occupants was mandatory. She said demolition assessment would begin today. One deputy asked where the order originated. She said county housing. He asked for a case number. She pointed to the top of the page and read one out loud. He repeated it into his radio. The pause that followed lasted longer than she expected. She filled the silence by explaining that mountain enforcement required speed. She said delays caused danger. She said she had worked closely with officials to streamline the process. The second deputy examined the papers more closely. He asked why the county seal looked photocopied. She said it was a digital reproduction. He asked why the signature block listed a retired official. She said the county reused templates. He asked why the address line referenced a different parcel. She snapped that clerical errors didn't change authority. She ordered the flatbed driver to prepare the truck for towing my vehicle. She said it was obstructing enforcement. She said the deputies should remove me if I interfered.
She said she had already coordinated with dispatch. She said everything was cleared. The driver moved forward. I stepped between him and the truck. The HOA president raised her voice immediately and accused me of obstructing a lawful action. She told the deputies to detain me. One deputy placed a hand on his belt but didn't move. He asked her again to confirm the source of the order. She said county housing. He asked which office. She hesitated, then named one. He radioed it in. Neighbors began to gather at the edge of the road, drawn by the noise and the flashing reflection of sunlight on windshields. The HOA president noticed and raised her voice further, narrating the situation like a performance. She said the owner was defiant. She said the association was protecting the community. She said unsafe structures endangered everyone. The radio crackled. Dispatch responded that no active condemnation order existed for the address provided. The HOA president laughed and said there must be a delay in the system. She said enforcement didn't wait for databases. She said paperwork was already approved. She waved the papers again. The deputy asked her directly if she had altered or created the documents herself. She reacted instantly, offended, and accused him of disrespect. She said she had legal counsel. She said she worked with the county regularly. She said accusing her was inappropriate. She said the deputies were there to assist, not question. The second deputy asked the flatbed driver to stop. The driver hesitated, looking between them and the HOA president. She shouted that he was authorized. She said stopping now would be a breach of contract. She said she would hold him accountable. He backed off anyway. She then pulled out her phone and called someone she referred to as her contact at the sheriff's office. She put it on speaker again. She said deputies were refusing to enforce a valid order. She said she needed confirmation immediately. The call went unanswered. She called again. Still nothing. The deputy asked her to step aside. She refused and said she was in charge. He told her she was interfering with an active investigation. She scoffed and said investigation wasn't required. She said enforcement was already decided. She said I was stalling them and manipulating them. I spoke once, clearly. I said the papers were fraudulent. I said the order didn't exist. I said towing my vehicle without lawful authority was theft. I said detaining me without cause was illegal. I said everything happening was being recorded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't add explanation. She snapped and pointed at me, accusing me of threatening officials. She told the deputies I was attempting to intimidate her. She said she felt unsafe. She demanded they remove me immediately. One neighbor gasped audibly. Another started recording on their phone. The deputy told her to lower her voice. She refused. She said she would call the media. She said she would call the board. She said she would call the county commissioner personally. She said no one treated her like this. The deputy asked her identification. She handed it over angrily. He took the papers from her clipboard and began comparing them to information on his tablet. His expression changed slowly, from neutral to focused. He asked her where she obtained the seal image. She said online. He asked if she had authorization to reproduce it. She said authority was implied. He told her to stop all enforcement actions immediately. She laughed again, but it sounded strange now. She said he was overstepping. She said she would file a complaint. She said she had power here. The deputy told her to put her hands down and step away from the vehicle. She froze, confused. He repeated it. The crowd was quiet now. The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably behind her. She asked if she was being detained. He said she was being investigated for presenting fraudulent documents and misusing law enforcement presence. Her face changed then, color draining, confidence cracking. She looked at me for the first time not as a problem, but as a variable she hadn't accounted for. She opened her mouth to speak and stopped. The mountain stayed silent as the realization settled in. She had crossed the line publicly, legally, and irreversibly, and everyone present could see it.
The reversal began the moment the deputy stepped away from the HOA president and spoke into his radio with a tone that didn't ask for permission. He requested supervisory response, county legal, and an on-duty inspector, citing suspected document fraud and misuse of law enforcement presence. The words carried clearly in the open air, and the crowd heard them. The HOA president heard them too. She tried to interrupt, but the deputy raised a hand without looking at her and finished the call. Within minutes, another patrol vehicle arrived, then a county SUV marked for inspections. The dynamic shifted visibly. The HOA board members moved farther back, whispering to each other, suddenly uncertain about their proximity to her. She attempted to regain control by addressing the crowd, saying everything was being handled, saying misunderstandings happened during enforcement. No one responded. The inspector who arrived was not the one she expected. He introduced himself formally, badge displayed, and asked to see the documents she had presented earlier. She handed them over with forced confidence. He didn't speak while reviewing them. He simply flipped pages, compared seals, checked signatures, and cross-referenced parcel data on his tablet. Each swipe took longer than the last. A second supervisor approached and asked my name. I gave it. He asked if I was the property owner. I said yes. He asked if I would consent to a formal review. I said I already had. I handed him the prepared folder. He looked through it once, then again more slowly. He asked where I obtained certain filings. I told him the offices involved. I told him the dates. I told him the permit numbers. The HOA president tried to interject, saying those documents were irrelevant because the association superseded individual ownership. The inspector looked up and asked her to repeat that statement. She did, louder this time. He asked if she understood that her association did not have jurisdiction over non-member parcels. She said membership was automatic. He asked her to show proof. She couldn't. The supervisor asked me what my role was beyond ownership. I answered calmly and fully for the first time. I stated my professional authority, my credentials, and my jurisdictional reach. I stated it without emphasis, without threat, like reading a fact from a page. The effect was immediate. The supervisor nodded once. The inspector paused mid-scroll. One deputy exhaled sharply. The HOA president stared at me, blinking, recalculating. She tried to laugh it off and said credentials didn't matter here. The supervisor corrected her. He said credentials mattered everywhere. He said especially when false documents were involved. The inspector informed her that the notices she issued were invalid. He said enforcement actions taken without authority constituted trespass and property damage. He said shutting off utilities without legal cause was a violation. He said destruction of fixed structures without permit was criminal mischief. He said each action carried separate consequences. She began to speak rapidly, blaming contractors, blaming misunderstanding, blaming urgency. She said she was protecting the community. She said she acted in good faith. The supervisor told her good faith didn't include forged seals. He told her impersonating county authority was a serious offense. One of the HOA board members stepped forward and said they had trusted her judgment. The supervisor asked if they had authorized document creation. The board member hesitated, then said no. Another board member shook his head quickly. Distance formed around her like a physical thing. The inspector turned to the crowd and stated clearly that no condemnation order existed, no lien had been filed, and no demolition review was authorized. He said the property was legally owned, permitted, and protected. He said enforcement actions were suspended immediately. The neighbors murmured. Phones kept recording. The HOA president's voice dropped. She asked if this could be handled privately. The supervisor said no. He said too many lines had been crossed. He said the record was public now. The deputy who had first questioned the documents informed her she was being detained for further questioning. He instructed her to place her hands behind her back. She protested loudly, accusing everyone of conspiring against her. She said she would call her attorney. He told her she could do that after processing. As the cuffs went on, she looked around desperately, searching for support that wasn't there. The board members stepped back. The crowd stayed silent. The mountain watched.
The inspector asked me if I wanted to file a formal complaint for damages. I said I already had. I showed him the submission receipt. He nodded and said an emergency injunction would be issued to prevent further HOA contact. He said restoration orders would follow. He said contractors would be billed to the association. The HOA president informed the board members that their association was under review. He said all enforcement actions would be audited. He said any liens or notices issued would be voided. He said cooperation would determine outcomes. The HOA president was led toward the patrol car, her earlier confidence completely gone. Someone in the crowd asked what would happen to her. The supervisor answered plainly that charges would be determined after review. No dramatics, no speculation. As the car door closed, she finally understood she had chosen the wrong house, the wrong morning, and the wrong person to intimidate. Everything she believed about control had collapsed in front of witnesses, documentation, and authority she never bothered to check.
The consequences unfolded over the next 14 days, quietly but thoroughly, without drama or negotiation. The HOA president was formally removed from her position by emergency vote before the week ended. The board released a statement claiming procedural failures and miscommunication, but the county wasn't interested in statements. The investigation moved forward with documents, timestamps, recordings, and physical evidence that could not be explained away. Charges were filed related to forged documents, impersonation of county authority, and coordinated property damage. Her attorney stopped returning calls within 48 hours. The association itself did not escape scrutiny. County inspectors audited every enforcement action taken over the previous 18 months. Liens issued without authority were flagged and voided. Fines assessed outside jurisdiction were canceled. Homeowners who had paid under pressure were notified and refunded. Emergency powers the HOA claimed were reviewed and declared invalid. The bylaws were amended under supervision, stripping the association of any language that implied authority beyond member properties. Contractors who had damaged my driveway, gate, and utilities were ordered to return, this time under county directive, to repair everything at the association's expense. The gate was replaced with reinforced steel. The driveway was regraded and resurfaced properly. The culvert was rebuilt to code. Utilities were restored with written confirmation from the county inspector. The garden fence was reinstalled and the irrigation line repaired. Each fix was logged, photographed, and signed off. A formal injunction was issued preventing the HOA or any representative from contacting me directly. All communication had to go through county legal counsel. The association was also barred from posting notices on my property or entering it for any reason. Boundary markers were resurveyed and installed visibly, ending any future ambiguity. Maps were updated. Records were corrected. Neighbors who had watched the confrontation stopped by afterwards, some quietly apologetic, others simply curious. I kept conversations short. This wasn't about validation. It was about resolution. The mountain returned to its normal silence once the vehicles stopped coming. The board appointed an interim president. He sent a single email acknowledging the outcome and confirming compliance with county orders. There were no threats in it, no warnings, just confirmed. The tone had changed completely. Work resumed. Power stayed on. Water flowed normally. My project deadline was extended without penalty once documentation was submitted. Life returned to routine at the same pace it had always moved, just without interference. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. I did not give interviews. Everything that mattered was already on record. Authority doesn't announce itself. It corrects problems and moves on. The house was no longer dark at night. The porch light stayed on. The driveway held. The gate closed smoothly. The mountain looked the same as it always had, indifferent to ego, unmoved by paperwork,
unimpressed by threats. The HOA president's name disappeared from the association website, then from the board minutes, then from relevance entirely. The rules she had twisted were rewritten clearly, limiting enforcement strictly to consenting members. Oversight committees were installed, county liaisons assigned. The association learned, the hard way, where its power ended. I finished my renovation on schedule. Inspections passed, permits closed. The property stood exactly where it always had, unchanged by her attempt to control it. Some people believe pressure creates compliance. Others believe noise creates authority. Both beliefs fail when they collide with facts, jurisdiction, and patience. I didn't raise my voice once through any of it. I didn't threaten. I didn't rush. I let the system see what she had done and who she had done it to. The mountain went back to being just a mountain. If the HOA did this to your house, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share for more real HOA stories like this.